So on Sunday, I talked about Romans 1:17 and the challenge to interpret it correctly, the challenge to apply it correctly. You know, one of the realities when we think about righteousness, that was one of the challenges, the righteousness of God. Seems straightforward, but none of us can really understand righteousness. I mean, we might be able to define it, but how do you understand righteousness? I kind of thought about it this way. When we think righteousness would be beyond what we think of as perfect. Okay, so let's say that there's a test that you're taking and perfect is 100%. So, hey, I'm perfect. Well, probably not from the sense of righteousness. Because on that test, perfect would also include not only getting the right answer, but not doubting any of the answers. Beyond that, let's say you were writing your answer. It would mean perfect penmanship, which I would never have. It would mean, if you were typing, it would mean never hitting the backspace key or deleting or highlighting anything and overdoing it. It would mean thinking perfectly about the answer the entire time that you were answering it. And there's probably another 10 or 12 things that I'm not even thinking of, because righteousness is so far beyond what we can truly fathom. And yet, in Romans 1:17, it says the righteousness of God is revealed. When we see the word righteous or righteousness in the Bible, we have an understanding of what it means, even if we can't fully understand the scope of it. And the truth is, on Romans 1:17, on that verse, I read for hours and hours and hours this past week, trying to get a grasp on this understanding and on the understanding of what Paul means by faith, as will be in tomorrow's video. But what does the righteousness of God mean? Now, some of the arguments are a little bit technical, and I'm not going to go into all of those, and many of them rely a lot on Old Testament support. But the basic argument breaks down to this. Is the righteousness of God about the right standing of individuals before God? That is it a forensic aspect of righteousness? Or is it about the change that takes place within those who are now justified by God? That is a transformative understanding of righteousness. Now, this argument is very persuasive on both sides. Thus, I tend to think of it as both. And I'm not alone in this, but I think it is both forensic and transformative. Let me explain. So God's righteousness is revealed because of the gospel. Paul makes that very, very clear. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. And then verse 17, for in it, the gospel and salvation, the righteousness of God is revealed. So the righteousness of God comes from salvation. It comes from the gospel. And because of that, we can stand confidently before the throne of God. In fact, in Hebrews it says, let us boldly approach the throne of grace. So because of that, God is righteous, and He has justly ruled that you and I, if you are a believer, if I am a believer, that you and I have a right standing before Him. We can come before the throne and say, I am righteous because of God's righteousness, if indeed we are saved. That is the forensic understanding. That's a little more technical, it's a little more complicated maybe for some, but the other part of the righteousness of God is that once we have received the gospel, it is not enough to be able to stand before God. He wants us to turn into an image of Christ. Again, Romans 8:29. I mentioned that on Sunday. I mentioned that in yesterday's video as well. We have no power, we have no authority to do this ourselves, but because of God, because of God's righteousness, His righteousness works within us to change us. Thus, as we yield to Him, we are transformed and can become imitators of God. You can find that phrase used by Paul in Ephesians 5:1, that we are commanded to be imitators of God. And in that, the word be imitators is nothing that we do. It is what God does to us. The verb is passive. It is that God is doing something to us rather than us doing it for God. So the righteousness of God gives us a legal standing before God. That is, we have been declared righteous because of the works of Jesus. Romans 2:13 says that clearly. As well as the righteousness of God works within us to make us righteous so that we can live our lives the way that He wants us to live. In both ways, and each way is inextricably linked together, the righteousness of God is certainly revealed. So what is clear, what I can say absolutely is clear about this particular passage, is that the righteousness is God's righteousness. It is nothing of our own. The idea here, again, is passive, which means that God's righteousness is doing something to us. It is the righteousness that comes from God. We cannot do anything to make it appear. We cannot make it be revealed. God has to reveal it to us. It is God's to reveal when He pleases, how He pleases, and to whom He pleases. And that is why we must be thankful that God is not only ruling by righteousness and by justice, Psalm 97, verse 2, but that He also provides grace, Ephesians 5:5. So the question today is have you received that righteousness? If you are saved, the righteousness of God is within you. But are you letting that power transform you? If not, what will you do about that today?